Okay, 7:30. It's January. It's cold. The Ed Services meeting. Let's kick it in gear. What do you got, Jenny?
All right. We just wanted to start with a bit of a review of where we're at with Act 20, specifically with our assessment and reading plan piece. As you recall from some of our updates, we are required by state law to be using the Ames Web Plus assessment for our 3 times a year assessment for our kindergarten through 3rd grade students. We did not find out what that assessment would be until I think it was mid-summer, mid-July perhaps, and so we were given a reprieve on that first assessment window. So January, doesn't feel like July outside. January is our first assessment window. We chose January in that winter assessment window to do that. So we're assessing kindergarten through 3rd grade. And with that assessment, any student who falls
joined the meeting
below the 25th percentile will need to have a reading plan completed there. I did share with you some of our documents that we have been using for that assessment piece. I have Desha Kiley here, who is one of our reading coaches and our district reading specialist, who has been hugely supportive as we work through these pieces because it is complex and there are very specific timelines on these pieces as well. So you can see if a student scores below the 25th percentile, we have, no matter what, we have to notify a family of their screening scores within 15 days. We have diagnostic assessments that we need to complete for those students. We create a personalized reading plan, and then we monitor their progress for 10 weeks. The goal is to get those students above the 25th percentile, at which point they can be exited from the plan. And if they are not, then they continue on that personalized reading plan. We created our own personalized reading plan. Again, that was courtesy of our coaches, actually, Desha. We tried to make it as simplified as possible, with the information that is required by state law on there, with the literacy data for the family to take a look at, and then an analysis of what area they need additional instruction in, and then what that intervention plan would be. And then you do need to try to get a signature from the parent. However, we do not need permission to implement the plan. And then weekly progress monitoring. We will be mostly using Ames Web for that progress monitoring. And then what is the student's response to that plan? We've had a lot of discussions. Our Title I reading teachers are taking a lot of these students. We've worked very closely with Sarah and the special ed team because many of our students with IEPs also need reading plans. It's not enough that they would have an IEP. And so our special ed teachers are implementing reading plans for our students, mostly with IEPs, our students who are English language learners. Our EL teachers are working with them on their reading plans as well. So we are in the process of this heavy lift. I think we are getting good information from the Ames Web Plus. We do plan on having Kristen Malloy present the Ames Web Plus data in the February Ed Services meeting so that you get a sense of how we're doing there. Just a brief overview, and then if anyone has any questions about that as well.
I have 2 questions on this, and you can answer them at the same time. How much of this were we already doing in some shape or form? I.e., how much more work is it for you to do it this way versus the way that it was done? And then of these, I'm going to say these 3 documents. Well, the first document is just kind of the flow chart, but then you also have the reading plan, and then you also have the diagnostic assessments guide, and this, how much of it was dictated by the state as part of Act 20, and how much of it was, I'll say, created on our own to meet the way that we want to implement it, or how much flexibility did we have in it? So between what were we doing and how much more now do we have to do by law, and how much of this do we even have the opportunity to challenge, edit, or say, we don't like that? So you can
I'll let you
answer
jump
them both together.
I think in terms of like what our Title I teachers were doing, it's pretty similar. We already were doing universal screeners and a little, probably not as much depth of diagnostics, but we were doing some diagnostics to choose the right interventions for kids. Obviously, the documentation piece is kind of the paperwork where it's a little different than probably the process before. Depending on how many students fall below that 25th percentile, that could also impact who else has to provide services, who maybe have not provided reading services before, maybe like a classroom teacher, or some of this diagnostic piece of the weekly progress monitoring is new to some of our special education teachers, our EL teachers. So there will be a slight learning curve there. So mostly what's different is the paperwork that's required. The second part of your question. The state has spelled out a lot of what we have to use AIMSweb. We have to do 10 weeks of progress monitoring once an intervention starts. We have to have a reading plan. So those things are in place. The pieces where there's a little flexibility are the diagnostics. The state approved 5 different sources for those diagnostics. The local CISAs came together and tried to support districts by saying, within AIMSweb, these are some of the diagnostics that are available to you. So they were really helpful saying, like, you don't have to go and purchase X, Y, and Z. Here's some resources within AIMSweb. And then from there, we're also supposed to have some local diagnostics. For the most part, we have done that with 0 cost. That kind of drills down more into where specific skill deficits are. So that piece of that local diagnostic is really on our control. So we've put some things in place that give us good data, do not cost us a lot of money, kind of more informal information. So that's really the piece where we're flexible at. The interventions are a little flexible as well. That's up to district's decision. Obviously, they want them to be evidence-based, research-based, highly effective strategies, but we do have kind of the say of what do we have in-house that we're already using? What do we see as something we may need through this process that we need to purchase additional intervention materials, but that's on our local.
Okay. I have 2 more questions and I've got to ask them first so I don't forget them. Sorry. Is this all just going to be paper, or are you going to put this in a database so that Chris can mine information out of it? So for example, if an intervention tool is whatever one of these is listed here, and you find out that half of your kids went through a intervention requiring, let's say, I can't even say these words, phonemic awareness versus fluency versus oral language. So if you check this box, does this just end up on a sheet of paper, or can you then correlate that and validate that that's the intervention that seemed to work the best? Because if this just all ends up in a piece of paper, and then I guess, is it in Skyward? Is something that Chris gets that can be datatized and then or digitized, I guess would be the right word for it, so that it can then be analyzed to see how we're doing at it? Or is this just all going to end up on a bunch of sheets of paper?
We're working with Chris on that, creating that system.
Okay.
We already kind of currently do that on paper basis in each school with our Title I rosters and looking at what interventions kids had, how successful were those interventions, did we have to change interventions? So we do that in-house, but as you said, more on paper basis of this is a great, this is always like our go-to intervention for kids with a deficit in phonemic awareness or a deficit in comprehension.
Obviously, those things that can be discreetly entered, not a lengthy paragraph as an assessment, which you can't analyze, or Chris can't analyze, but checking a box or putting an age group or putting a previous score and the next score would all be things that could be correlated.
And the state does ask for that information come July 1.
And that would certainly speed up that the time it takes to produce it.
Some of the things that they'll ask us is how many kids had reading plans, how many kids exited reading plans. So they'll be looking for some of that data as well.
Chris or somebody will have to be creating, or Skyward will have to get a module in order to track all that. Okay. Sorry, Lori?
Does this replace Title I?
No.
I mean,
Yeah, right.
I'm just wondering, like, staff wise, like, what is this gonna look like? You know?
Right, the more staff, the better would be, you know, our Title I staff is shrinking and because that's connected to federal money
Okay,
and state money.
okay,
The idea of Title I is a little different than probably what it's been in the past, is more of, expert reading teachers providing services. In our, 4 of our 5 elementary schools are school-wide based. So that means they can basically serve the population in different ways. They could be providing in classroom support with a classroom teacher. They can be doing small pull-out groups. They can be using one-on-one interventions. So no, it won't replace them.
yeah, will it maybe pull some of those students that maybe would have been put in Title I, maybe they won't be put in Title
That-
I, where this could be a
Mhm.
supplement,
That
maybe finding a little bit, I'm
Yes,
just trying to go
correct.
off of what I remember from the elementary
Right, it
days.
could be, it could look that way because, in our current practices, we look at kids who are reading below grade level and finding their best fit.
Right,
And sometimes that may be someone who would actually score above the 25th percentile.
right,
And now we're probably going to really put those reading people, those expert reading people with that 24th percentile and below. So there'll probably be some students who will not receive services from a Title I teacher.
Okay.
But will have to maybe get para support or a double dip with their classroom teacher. To kind of remediate skills.
One comment I did want to make, and I'm sorry I did not get the answer to that question, is we are very lucky to have reading corps in our schools. It's something that is very closely aligned with the science of reading, and it has been sponsored with us through the Greater Watertown Community Health Foundation. And they can't do the progress monitoring per se with this, but they are able to do some of the services provided with it as well. And I think the goal long-term is to say that these interventions would get kids up and out. So that's the goal long-term.
Sam?
A few, piggybacking on David's question about where these are housed, et cetera, et cetera. Does this information ultimately go into the CUME folder? Does it ultimately go into Skyward so parents have access to it? Because with a DEP for advanced learners or an IEP, each of those plans parents have access to. So just, wanting to make sure of that. If parents, how does this get used from the teacher lens, not just those that are servicing, like as an interventionist or something like that? Like typically you see Lexile level or reading level, yet I don't really see that on here, but that's how parents see if their child is making growth. So is there a place to have that? So at least parents get the regular language they have, not the teacher speak language from AimsWeb, just so there's they can see that. So I'm okay with, I don't need the exact details, just, I figured you guys knew where it was, but those weren't things that were hit on here.
So yes, it will be in CUMES. I'll just address it for a second. And then AimsWeb does provide us a report. We do we do a variety of sub-tests. And so they do present nice graphs about like your kid or your child falls in the average range for oral reading fluency, but might be below in reading comprehension, but is high in vocabulary. So there's a really easy graph for both teachers to understand. Teachers, when they enter their data into the AimsWeb website, they get a plethora of data about that student, but then also their class. So they'll get like how overall, what's your class? How is your class doing in reading comprehension versus fluency? Here is some skills that based on their score, you may want to double check. So they are getting additional information there. And then obviously working with the parents and talking with parents through that personal reading plan when we do have those chances at conferences. Parents always have the opportunity to provide feedback on their reading plan. So that would be great for their questions as well.
Perfect. And my last question is very specific.
Yeah.
It's in section 1, under additional supports. It talks about a talent development plan. Is that referencing like the advanced learner piece? Because that's no longer called talent development. So you might want to consider changing that language. That's old language, just so it's consistent throughout.
Got it.
Sam? Anyone?
No, I don't think so.
I did one other question, and that's just, I'm gonna say, are there what's the expectation from the state? How do we get graded as a district?
that they're below 25, they're above 25, we have 80%. Yeah. I understand the goal is to make everybody better, but is there any teeth associated with Act 20? Is there any, what happens if we don't do well? What happens if we do really well? Anything? I mean,
Not specifically related to that.
Okay.
Yes.
does it show up on a state scorecard? Does it do?
Not at this point, it's not, my understanding, it's not on the state report card. I think the piece that would be the most, the state getting involved with is more related to the curriculum. If there was a family who believed that there was an issue with the curriculum, they could file an issue with the state. We do have to report our processes and our scores and things like that to the state, but there's no like
Okay,
specific teeth related to the assessment piece.
okay. Okay,
All right.
good,
All
great.
right.
Thank you.
Okay. The next topic I just wanted to revisit, and we have it on our calendar to revisit annually, is that working curriculum review cycle, draft document that, I put together last year. As I had mentioned previously, I do view this as a working document. And I'll note that there have been several updates to it. There was feedback from this group last year that I wanted to make sure to note on here. For instance, Dinah had pointed out that we did not acknowledge necessarily 912 ELA on here, and I had an opportunity to work with them to note where historically we were at with this. I think we have talked a lot about the fact that this has not been a traditional cycle that we have done here in our district. And so what I wanted to do was note where we've been and aim for where we're going. I think we have benefited greatly from our ESSER dollars in the fact that we have been able to invest a lot in our curriculum materials and a lot in professional development related around those curriculum materials. And then sort of forecast into the future where we're going. So I will always keep this probably watermarked as a draft, as a working document. It's just the way I am. You'll note as we get to the bottom, we move from like elementary or 912 or 612, that the goal is to move to this K-12 ELA, K-12 math, K-12 science, K-12 social studies. And in theory, I probably should be marking that as for K-12. So that rather than having them be disjointed processes, that we are moving through this and we're talking about this as teams that represent across the grade levels. We were not able to do that just for a variety of reasons in the past. And so some things that I have updated, you'll note that I did move up with conversations, our ELA to 27-28. Now, we are knee deep right now at the elementary level in our curriculum review process, and it is only 25 right now. And so I would not necessarily anticipate in that year one that I believe that it's because we're going to like rehash exactly what we're doing at the elementary level. But I believe that it'll be timely for us to come together as a K-12 team to analyze where are we at with literacy K-12. There have been some major changes at there will be some major changes at the elementary level. There have been some major changes at the middle level with literacy, and start having some conversations about where are we at with literacy. I sat with Chris Malloy, and we started talking about what data pieces we want to track when it comes to implementation, talking about sort of pre-implementation, what data we're looking at, and then how we're breaking the data down in year one of implementation of any curriculum that we're adopting, and how we're breaking that down. To me, it's important that we're looking at that data overall. We're looking specifically at our state assessment, not necessarily our local assessments, but our state assessments. We're breaking it down at the elementary level by school as well as elementary, that we're breaking it down by subgroups, and that we're also breaking it down by standard, so that we can compare and say, hey, our previous curriculum looks like it was really strong in this standard. Our new curriculum looks like perhaps we're seeing growth, a dip, we're maintaining, so that we can make comparisons along the way and we can be looking at that with teams. I think it's also important to note that, as we talked about last night in policy, when I look at the Neola policy, talks about a 5-year cycle. This is a 7-year cycle. And so that would be some conversation amongst the policy review committee as well as this committee, if we want to shift this from a 7-year cycle to a 5-year cycle. There potentially could be some budget implications, but as we noted at the very top of this, that we would never necessarily be committing budget dollars to this process. That every year we need to be looking at the budget with the finance department, with, in this case, Sarah Duncan, to determine whether or not there are budget dollars to make those purchases of curriculum. So that's sort of an overview of some of the changes. The other reason I felt like it was important to bump up the ELA piece is that our middle school has been deep in their implementation of Wit and Wisdom. And I didn't feel like we could wait to analyze where they have been at. I know they have been working with Chris, and it's kind of where we pulled what sort of data we want to look at to make comparisons. They have seen some tremendous growth compared to the state average when they look at their Wit and Wisdom implementation, and so I thought it was important that we come together with that. If we want to just look at very specific where we're at in each area, I think we mentioned the fact elementary, we're in that curriculum review, we're down to 2 sets of materials in the pilot. Middle is continuing that implementation of Wit and Wisdom. They are continuing with Great Minds Coaching, which is the company that published Wit and Wisdom. High school, they can continue with their implementation. They did do a standards review with support from CESA 2 in that 22-23 school year. And then I bumped up that initial year 1 from 2030 to 2027. Math, again, we're in year 1 of implementation of full bridges. If you remember correctly, we implemented Number Corner last year. We're continuing with our coaching support from CESA 2. Middle school, we're in year 2 of Illustrative Math, which is published through Kendall Hunt, continuing with coaching support from CESA 2. And high school, we're technically in year 1 of Open Up with coaching support from CESA 2. If you remember correctly, we essentially piloted Open Up all last year from high school. Science, if you noted anything from this morning, elementary is very busy right now with Acts 20, so we're maintaining our status quo with science. Middle school, we're using year 1 implementation of Amplify Science. High school, we're continuing, as we've mentioned, working on our standards implementation. We're looking at course sequencing, and we'll look to see a proposal from them in the spring. And I also bumped science up 1 year in the K-12 renewal. Again, social studies maintaining the status quo at the elementary level. Middle school and high school is continuing to work through their curriculum review cycle. This is something that has not been work that team has done 6-12 anytime in the recent history. And so it's something that I anticipate we will continue to focus on next year. I know at the middle school, we're really trying to take an avid focus with those middle school teachers, and we'll spend some time over the summer with them as they map out their specific curriculum and standards in their curriculum. I also bumped the full K-12 science social studies review up 1 year. As we look ahead to 25-26, that implementation of elementary literacy, continued work with 6-12 social studies, and then you can see continued refinement there. One other comment that I do want to make is that I have started having conversations with Ashley and with our secondary coaches about working toward individual course guides. And so that we have a very clear understanding of what's being taught in each course at, each level. This is work that had started pre-pandemic, and I'm sort of resurrecting some of those pieces as well. But really having a very clear outline about what's being taught in each one of those courses as well. And I think that that lends itself nicely to some of the work that we're doing with policy as it relates to curriculum as well. So that is my update, and I anticipate that we will have some questions about that.
Fair away.
I just have a clarifying question.
Sure.
You had mentioned, about being a 7-year plan, and you
Yes.
feel that this is a 5-year plan.
Mhm.
Yet with the draft, it does say 7 years, because years 5, 6, and 7 kind of are that implementation, whatever stage. So is it really a 5-year? Is it really a 7? Because I thought it was a 7-year plan.
It is a 7-year plan. The Neola policy that we had proposed last night talks about it as a
The
5-year
5,
plan.
okay.
And so if we need to adjust it,
Got it.
I am happy to do that, or if we
I was
want
thinking
to
it was
adjust
vice versa.
policy. Yeah,
Thank
yeah,
you.
nope, I agree with
And
you.
on that same subject, given that you've already stated that, hey, we're elementary science, we're maintaining the status quo due to Act 20. What do you think the bandwidth is? And how much does it change over 5 to 7 years? Because when it becomes a policy question, if best practice or our practice, and our bandwidth is 7 years, then I just make a recommendation of policy that when that policy gets adopted, unless we see some pressing reason otherwise, let's make it 7-year because policy as an entity doesn't care what Ed Services does. But if they're responsible for the policies, then Ed Service better back the policy. And from what I understand, Jenny, you and your team believe that 7 years is the way to go, in which case that just would have to go to policy, because policy is not going to trump Ed Services. It's going to be a matter, do we as a governing body want to ask policy to write it in a particular way?
And that policy is on hold right now anyways, correct?
I don't know if it was that one that had the curriculum review,
Mhm.
but yeah.
So, I mean, it's
Yeah, just make
something
sure that
that-
we,
when we do talk about it,
I think the
Discuss that
reason
point.
we wanted to move with 7 years at this point is because I think there was a lot of work that needed to be done. And I think that, there are certain areas that aren't even represented on this curriculum review cycle, like CTE, art, music, world languages. And so I think that that was part of the reason we wanted to move
fill in
with
some of those
7
gaps.
year,
Okay.
is to sort of give us time to work through those pieces.
Okay,
So I would say make the recommendation of policy.
Yeah,
To
that-
change it from 5 to 7.
Yeah.
As an
Okay.
action item.
I'll, whenever we get around to that policy.
But at least it's the recommendation from Ed Service, it just comes highly recommended when this body
Right,
recommends that it's there, then it's not a huge discussion there because it's already gone through that filter.
and just hope that at least one or two of us who are on both committees remember.
But if it's an action item, if you put it as an action item now, like we
But
talked
if
about.
it's an action item for, policy, it's not an action item for Ed Services per se.
Sure.
Because they're the ones who are gonna be drafting and ratifying the policy. So
Mhm.
we'll note it, we'll circle back to
I
that,
get it.
Lori.
I do have a question. I know you mentioned that like the individual course guides and, like up on top, it says other areas on department determined as needed basis. Is that eventually going to get put into a cycle? Or I know that covers a lot of courses, but I know it's been a question I have had, who is approving a lot of this curriculum to begin with? Do you know what I'm saying? There's a lot of curriculum out there that I don't think the board has, maybe they've seen it. We've approved a lot of new courses. Where does that curriculum come from? If it's not coming, I know teachers, but is it teacher written? I'm just curious what that looks like.
I think traditionally, I do think Craig had his hand up too, but it looks like it's down now. I think traditionally how it worked is that there was a course proposal that was brought to Ed Services. I believe at some point this committee was called like the curriculum committee. And then it was approved at that point and then put into the course book at that point.
But like, for instance, I know we have approved a lot of new courses.
Mhm.
who's writing the curriculum for those new courses, per se, like,
Typically, it's the teacher who proposes the course.
okay.
Mhm.
I just know that board is supposed to approve curriculum, so
Yeah, and
if there's
that's the-
curriculum that's never been
yeah.
approved, I don't know what that looks like.
That's the next two agenda
Right, that'll go
topics.
into the next
And
group,
well, it's the next two agenda items as well as it touches on the policy that didn't get pushed to first read last night. So
Okay.
they're all gonna be lumped together, but let's put that on the side just for a
Okay.
second.
sounds good.
My only other question related to this is that, whether intentionally or unintentionally in the past, you know, K6 or K5 went at a different speed with math than middle school. And then high school went at a different, and it was staggered, and it was unintentionally staggered or intentionally staggered. And then you find out, well, how does wit and wisdom, but which program does it better feed into? Does it better feed into this one? Does it better feed into that one? Or math or social studies? Making sure there weren't gaps. We talked about that in social studies last week, or, you know, the one teaches it in, you know, eighth or ninth grade, and the other one teaches it in seventh grade, and then you get a gap if the kids go through it in the wrong order, and pretty soon they don't know where the, you know, the country of England is on a world, on a globe, because we missed it. So in what now you have these, as you pointed out, for K-12. Okay. Is that I assume that you've thought about that and that's gonna be what you consider to be the most effective way to do it, is so that you're not, you know, doing elementary school and then finding out what they get out of it for 2 or 3 years, and then doing middle school staggered on top of that. You're gonna do the whole thing top to bottom all at once. And I just wanted to understand the pros and cons of that methodology versus trialing at the elementary school and making sure that it has all the dust off, you know, we got all the wrinkles worked out. And now we know truly what we have to put into the middle school in order to get it lined up with the one in front of it. So should we stagger from the bottom up or just do the whole thing in one big column at a time? That's my question for your team and how that you anticipate that working.
I think it's really, really important that you're having conversations that span the full gamut. And so that you're bringing together like your elementary, middle and high school teachers together to be having those conversations. I also think it's really incredibly important that wherever we're selecting is based on the standards that are selected by the state and the school district, so that when you're working through the curriculum, that they're standards based, that a child is growing in the standards as they move through the system. And so those pieces are important to me. And then, of course, there are going to be conversations within grade spans, right? About what, you know, what do we need more at the elementary level? What do we need to transition from 5th to 6th? What do they need from 8th to 9th? And so I think all of those pieces play a role in it. I don't foresee a time where you're not sort of doing both of what you said, but the challenge is if we're just in an elementary conversation and we're not having conversations with secondary folks, then we're never sort of bridging that gap. And what we're trying to do is sort of bridge that gap now.
That makes sense. I just want to make sure that Civil War doesn't just suddenly disappear or nobody gets earth science because we switched curriculum and, well, you were supposed to get it in 8th grade and now you're supposed to get it in 9th, or you're supposed to get it in 9th and now you get it in 8th, and you just happen to matriculate from 8th to 9th and now you didn't get earth sciences.
Mm-hmm.
You have no idea what archipelago is because you just, whoops, I skipped it. You know, and I don't know how anytime you change curriculum, that's gonna be a risk, is that one book or one provider puts it in a different grade year that you're just, you moved out of. And I don't know how you guard against that. This is more content based, not outcome based, but I don't know how
But
they line up.
piggybacking to that, and Jenny and I've had this conversation multiple times since the math adoption, is using a continuum for standards. And I don't know where we are in terms of trying to develop that. If you have, these are standards for this grade level, this grade level, this grade level, it doesn't matter what textbook company you use, book you use. These are the standards that are supposed to be taught. And frankly, if this doesn't come here, within the district, you
Okay.
determine, are you doing it beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of the year? But we haven't had that for a while, and there were those gaps. So now we are starting to look at standards, but I would continue to encourage, if we can, continuum work is not easy. It'll take about 3 years probably to create, and I don't know if we have the bandwidth right now to do that, but at least bring that up again, that might be something to consider. So that way you have that, especially as we start moving to personalized plans. Personalized instruction, individualized instruction isn't anything new. It's been around 15 years. We aren't really doing it, but at least it's, hey, this kid's really excelling here. Where does that go? Do you go further down this? Do you go depth? That's the next level we need to be at if we're going that, but we're here, that's here. So just something to consider, but it answers your question in terms of how do we make sure we're not doing it? If you have that continuum, there's never a question.
Craig had his hand up, don't sound again, so. Okay, any other questions or comments on this one?
Yeah, I just put my comments in the chat, that's all.
Oh, there you go.
I feel like I'm like Zoom basic today. All right.
We're reading it now, Craig.
Yeah.
Yep, agreed,
I feel like that's a really good point. Thank you.
agreed. Okay, anything else on that subject? And the outcome of this, as far as, action items, it's, it's a living document. And, you know, maybe you can take draft off of there, Jenny, and just put on the top, last edited.
Okay,
Yeah.
I can do that. Can I still call it a working document?
Well, you can call it a working document, you can call it a draft, I don't care, I'm just, what, last edited. Okay, next up is course book approval procedure, and then, a follow-up from last month, which is, or the last board meeting, which would be the RMS course book in total, so that's items C and D. And, I think we're all generally aware of the backstory on course books, and I'll try to do my best job of summarizing for those who may not remember it the same that I do. Is that to our knowledge on the board, we've never approved the full course book. That just wasn't something that we were required to do. We would approve course additions and subtractions or changes. But if nothing was quote unquote changing, then it existed, could be forever without a technical review. And Jared brought that to us as being, hey, somebody's got to approve this course book in its whole, the whole body of the course book. And so that you're not just approving additions and subtractions, but that you're actually reviewing the book. And we had 6, I think, changes, Jason, at the last board meeting to the RMS course book, and all those changes were approved, but then the course book itself was on the agenda and it passed 6-2 or whatever it was. So the course book at the RMS has been approved.
That was the
That's
high
high
school.
Oh, excuse me, that was a high school course book?
Yeah.
My bad. High school course book. Yeah, I'm glad you corrected me. The high school course book, yet the RMS one is still up for review. So the question is how did we want to address this? To Lori's point earlier today, as well as in policy last night, there are, I don't want to say competing policies. Let's just say that there's options for how we codify this review. What Jenny and I had discussed on this particular topic is that because of the length of time it would take to review a course, and it's not so much the review, it's to change one, that it was our initial starting point to lock it down on January 1st, and not January 1st of 25 for the beginning of the 25 school year. Lock it down at January 1st of 25 for the beginning of the 26 school year, such that you would have a calendar year to do the review, request changes, et cetera, and then the year of the, I mean, so you review the course book all this year, you make changes, you bring up, or on January 1st, you bring up things you're interested in digging deeper into, making changes to, and then we have the entire 2025 calendar year. And then January 21st of 26 next year we'll be approving the 26-27 course book.
That was the thought process. And that also meant that those approvals would come with, I'm not gonna call them line item vetoes. That the approval would come with, these are the courses that we want to look at in the calendar year 25. So if we take the entire RMS course book and we identify 3 or 4 items, we're not that late now, it's January 13th or 14th. So we're not gonna be too rigid, but we don't want to be raising our hand in June and then giving everybody just 6 months to get a course book ready. So we really have to be diligent and committed to a January 1st cutoff under most circumstances. To say, hey, here's the 5 courses that we would like a deeper dive into in 25. But when the RMS course book comes up for approval, assuming we recommend that it moves forward to the full board, that it's okay to have some, I'll call it objections to it, but you have to teach the kids, which means they need the book. And if there's going to be exceptions to it, then those need to be noted more or less today or at the next board meeting so that it can get approved for 25, 26, but that we know what we're going to be diving into in the calendar year 25. And that's what Jenny and I had discussed prior to this meeting and also prior to policy last night and prior to Lori, your comments right now. So that's just a discussion. And that's kind of the template by which Jenny and I thought we'd lead off this part of the conversation. And that's the 20-minute discussion that's in front of us. So not knowing exactly what's in the draft policies that we saw last night or how closely it aligns to that, we were just more or less setting off the timeline to ensure that the staff had an adequate time to review and that the parents and the kids had adequate time to know what that course book was going to look like for the following year. And somewhat arbitrarily just picked January 1st for a calendar year cutoff. So that was, did I miss anything from our conversation?
No, and I think the work that we're doing, and I think it all sort of flows really nicely. As much as we probably all didn't want to be here last night, and I'm gonna turn around and be here right this morning again. What the Neola policy talked about last night was that the board, and again, I know we tabled that, but the board would be given a list of the courses. Not necessarily the board would approve the courses. And again, we tabled that and that's fine, but just as a point of discussion. I think the other work that I mentioned with the curriculum review cycle, the idea that we would be working with like course guides where we would get a little more meat into like what is being taught in every single class so that we would have that for like the board review so that we can see really what, and like I said, that work had started pre-COVID, and I think you remember what happened with COVID. And so just really getting back into the meat of that so that we have a better understanding of what's being taught in each course. And I think that all of these things kind of flow really naturally to give you a better understanding as well. And I know Jason is going to bring up the point that like the course book that we're looking at today really truly is meant for like middle school kids to look at and say, hey, what is it that I'm going to pick or not pick? And so he wants you to have that caveat as you're taking a look at this. This isn't necessarily like a full, like, this is exactly everything that's happening in all of these courses. And so I know that he has a tiny bit of trepidation about that. And Jason, I just saw you raise your hand too. So I want you to be able to say what you wanted to say.
Yeah, just a quick clarifier for me. So Jenny, you used course guide and course book is what we're talking about right now too. So like, for my understanding, like curriculum guide, would that be a way for me to think about the deeper, like, this is what's being taught in ELA 7, here's the curriculum guide. And then the course book or course guide would be more of the like, a pamphlet, but it's like a 19-page, here's a 2 or 3, 4 sentence little quick descriptor of each of the classes. Am I understanding that right?
Yep, and that's how I'm envisioning it too. And I think we have a start of the work on some of that. And truly, honestly, some of the curriculum adoption pieces that we've done have really helped that. A lot of the curriculum is open source. So really, truly, you could go in there and look at every single lesson. So just, it's a work in progress. I can't say that we're there yet. We'll get there.
Sounds good.
I appreciate patience.
Okay. Comments or questions on that process? And then, Sam, I'll say, if if we want to pull up the draft policy from last night and even review that now, we could do that. It's not part of the ed service minutes per se. It's part of the policy last night, but it's available. It's public. It's not like it's not quote unquote new. But if we don't do that now, what would be your, I don't want to say timeline or appetite. We know that we want to get the Neola book adopted and we want to get that done by May. And the curriculum policy per the goings on from last night. And I'm talking to Sam specifically because he and I are on policy. You're not even on
No,
policy, are you?
No, I just showed up for it.
That's right. I forget you're not policy.
You and I are on ed services together.
Yeah. Okay, well, Craig's online. He can listen to it.
Yeah.
So maybe a better question for Craig. Is that what I guess I'd like ed services to be the champion, the sponsor for that policy. Because that's that's where it makes the most sense. Policy shouldn't be its own champion for that policy. Policy is it just, make sure everything's in order.
Mhm.
So if we want to bring that draft back up through here,
Mhm.
in the near future and say, hey, we currently don't have a policy or the policy we do have is in need of some changes. And we're going to delay the implementation of that policy change until after the Neola book is fully written, which is more or less a policy agreed last night. But we'd like it to be consistent with the calendar that I just proposed, which is whatever that review looks like, here's the timeline of it. Because we just don't want to be trying to review a course book in July. And we'd like to make sure that the RMS course book next week gets brought forth, gets approved with noted courses that need a deep dive in 25. That's what I was hoping. And that's how that resolution would look.
Mhm.
And then any policy that gets generated would really be just like the last one, which the action item, which is the 5-year versus the 7-year. This would be a document that Ed Services owns. And if it needs to make changes to it, then of course those first reads go through policy. But this is something that would lie with us.
So are you thinking of like a subcommittee of the ed services committee to look over?
That'd be, yeah, I'm open to suggestions.
No, it should be full committee.
It'd be full, okay. Yeah, then full committee would just have to spend some time
Mhm.
taking what is the current curriculum policy and whatever Neola is, and then merging it with any changes that we'd want to make to it.
And then what we would do from what we've learned from planning, because we're doing the same thing with a different policy there, is we then take it over in this committee
Right,
where we have first read and then we go through with second read. So then it's out of policy's hands altogether. So it's not work committee looking and then kicking it
I
to
like
them.
that, because yeah, we try not to have two committees do the same job, whether it be fiscal and HR or ed services.
But that's why it becomes a
planning.
full committee
It's a
thing
full
as opposed to a
committee take ownership
subcommittee.
of that policy,
Mhm.
and then we take ownership of it.
Sure.
And I'm good with that as chair, and thanks for the suggestion, Diana. I think that'd be the best spot to do it, and I don't think Craig's gonna, lose any sleep over deferring it to us versus.
I just know that there are other things that may not be what we're discussing right now that I think Craig wanted to suggest.
Okay, then he'd come to an ed service meeting.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Well, he does. He's more, he's,
Doing both.
I am for now.
Yeah.
And I
But
don't,
not after
depends on when
first.
this comes back,
Yeah.
so.
I get, the goal, of course, is not just to understand I'll call it the rules of engagement on this today, but and by the way, it was Jared who said you need to approve the course book. And we're like, well, we've never approved a course book before. He said, well, you should have. Okay, well, the course book is gonna be on the agenda in 2 weeks. And it's not to say that it can't get voted against. The question is if we all vote against it, then what happens? Then middle schoolers don't have a course book, that they don't get to come to school next year. And it's not to back the board into a corner. It's more of a matter of let's work with the concept of line item. Yeah, we're approving it for the 25-26, but we know that we're going to be working on these 4 courses, and we'll note them in the resolution that these are the ones that Ed Services is going to do a deep dive in the calendar year 25, because the book has to go forward. And I'm not suggesting pulling coursework, I'm just saying is that we need to do a deep dive and then we'll get in a cadence and we won't have to do this. Or we'll understand it next year going into January, which ones we wanted to review.
I know we even talked about not necessarily even putting in the resolution exactly which the courses were, but rather folks could email you and that you and I can kind of work through that process of which ones are ones that folks want to do a deeper dive in. And then when we talk about the course, the curriculum guides, we can ensure that those are the courses that we focus on first. And then we're bringing those to you to take a look at so that we don't necessarily feel the pressure of we're writing that into the
Resolution as we
resolution
should,
right
yeah.
away. It gives us a tiny bit more
And-
flexibility with that.
Yeah, I agree. I wouldn't want to rewrite the resolution, real time. But then we have to be really, really good with our action items such that if all 4 people in this room right now raise their hand and say, I want Introduction to Spanish 7 reviewed. That's just what's on my page. Oh, the one below it is Introduction to Tourism and Hospitality. I like that one better. I want that one reviewed. That's fine. The course book gets approved. And that one goes directly to an action item for Ed Services and cannot slip through the cracks. Because that board member likely gave their approval contingent on that one getting reviewed in 2025, and we can't drop that ball.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, I suppose, I mean, the reason that I ask, I'll use an outlandish example. So if there's an elective, either a middle school or a high school elective, and it's hegemonic power structures and underwater basket weaving, something like that, right? It's something bizarre. And I'm like, well, I don't know about that. I'm not sure if that's something that I would want to approve. So what you're proposing is then that course gets set aside and it gets reviewed because,
it never gets set aside until it gets reviewed.
gotcha.
It doesn't get set aside on one board members or the vote of the board's distaste for it until it's been reviewed. And then the review is gonna take a year to do it. So if you bring it up now, then that means we get 25 to do it, but it doesn't come out of the 25-26 course book. It might come out of the 26-27 course book,
Sure.
but yes.
Absolutely. Okay, is there a way that we can then keep a list or a running working document of the course book for that following year? Because I think that the issue then comes up that we look at the course book that's going to be implemented in 6 or 7 months. It's already put together. There's courses on there that I've never seen a document about before. And maybe those courses were previously implemented in my specific case, but I can see this happening a year from now. Now it's too late. I was not informed of those courses and I'm being asked, okay, either approve of the book or don't approve of the book. And that becomes an issue because again, you get the hegemonic underwater basket weaving thing. And well, if I'm not comfortable approving that, I'm left no choice.
And I'm open to suggestions. I don't know how we, approve of, we all know that we need it. It's a question of when does it officially become approved? Because it has to exist. It's a matter of that there, and I'm just proposing a January 1st cutoff, and this is the first time we approved it. And we may just have to have some sour, swallow a bitter pill for the 26-20 or the 25-26 year, but we shouldn't have to for the 26-27.
Oh, yeah.
And
Completely.
so, and that's why I said we have to be thorough in where we document that, and Ed Services has to take it up and treat that one maybe with greater deference than any other action item that we have. Or it goes on to Jenny's working document.
We do have.
David?
Yeah, go ahead, Jared.
I was gonna say, if I may, really the only one that this is gonna affect is this first one, right?
Right.
The approval of it just moving forward, without having review of those in detail. Any other ones you can put on the list for us to dive into for the following year. So really, it's only gonna affect this one, and we've been operating that way for a long time.
Right.
So in
Lori,
the future, that would all be done before the course book got approved. Yeah.
but
So it's on
ideally,
the right
whether they're brought up on the January board meeting or we give a grace period of, let's say, the first quarter, that any requested review has to be made by no later than March 31st. And for those who own course books and curriculum, how long would, what's if you have to get one ready for the course book for 26-27, what's the shortest duration I could possibly give you to have to do a review? You know, I'm thinking 9 months or a year, but that would mean that the first quarter of every single year, the board has to get in their comments to Ed Services, but still know that they're gonna be approving the course book as written. But those comments in the first quarter will affect something coming out a year later and being taught 18 months later.
Just a small tweak.
Yeah.
I understand first quarter, but we'll have new board members potentially coming on at the end of April. That's the end of the first quarter into the second, so you
And
might
that's
want
why they
to
don't
skip.
get a comment.
Well,
But
then
because
they-
they.
but then they're asked, going to Sam's point, then they're asked to approve a course book that they had no input in. So I'm just saying, we might want to at least,
No,
if they come the end of April, if they're approved the end of April, they would come to,
a vote in January.
you know, but
10
they
months
have
later.
no real
ability
to make any comments for all of those months. I'm just saying, maybe we have it instead of by the end of April.
Well, the
It's
comments
just
they'd be able to make would be, if I get elected, if I'm on the board as of April 1st, and I immediately take this up and I'm looking at the document, I said, I need these 5 reviewed. Okay, well, they're gonna go into review in 26, and the course book is not gonna change because of that request, which means, yes, you're right. They would have to approve a course book. They may have been able to add 5 suggestions to it, but there's no way that the election and the course book and the start of school don't line up.
No, I'm
So-
not disagreeing. I'm just saying that just kind of puts a little handcuff in a situation because realistically, a board member comes on the end of April. They're not thinking, hey, I've got all of this to do unless we're putting that into new member orientation, which that's a part of the planning committee that we're talking right now. And that's not something that should be new member orientation. So I don't think we need to have a consensus today, but it just should be something that is continually thought about, just so that way they're not a city or a lame duck situation in this particular area.
You are getting exactly to my point, and that's why I didn't vote in favor of the course book, because there were several courses on there, which if I had had the ability or the opportunity to, I would have said, hey, let's check this course out. Let's look a little bit at what this course does and what we're teaching there. So I like the plan that you're talking about, but I agree with Diana that you're going to have a continuing issue of new board members coming on and new board members not being able to exercise that, which I think is important if they're going to be asked to vote for something, which is inherent to the kind of school year and election and the way that it's set up is there's a lot of stuff that people set in motion before you got on. And now you're being asked to approve of those things. And then if you say, hey, I want to learn a little bit more about that, now you're looked at as someone who's slowing down the process, and we can't slow down the process because that's bad. I mean, I don't know.
It is what it is, yeah.
And so,
I mean, I could immediately say, let's take the entire calendar year, I said, and let's move it to April. But now which means you have to be elected, seated, and immediately bring up a concern before the end of April. And then the course book doesn't even go out to the kids until April 1st of the next year, and I don't think that's not possible. This is my point, is
And then
that,
it becomes even more complex. It
Right.
becomes something like a graduation requirement, because you can't just change a graduation requirement when kids have been notified, right? So it does become even more complex.
Lori.
I look at it as the idea that there's oversight of the board. So if I was elected in April, I mean, there's a lot of things that the board approved the year before, and you have to work with it. And I think this is a good system to at least start to get better oversight
Agreed.
of the board. So there's always going to be things that you may come on.
the
as a new
timelines just
member.
don't work, yeah.
Yeah,
Timelines just
that's
don't
just the
work.
reality. And obviously, if that board member did have a big concern about a specific thing, then,
Well,
we can work with that.
in my view, the concern of one board member is still a question for us all as to how much can it redirect the resources of the district? Because if
They can still do the research.
one board member can direct an entire course to be pulled,
We would never have any.
then we're not operating well as a board.
well, I think the way that would work, again, using my example. So I see basket weaving. I say, hey, can we please review this? That ends up getting discussed, and if the Ed Services Committee says, hey, let's bring it to a vote, then it gets brought to a
That's
vote,
right.
right? I mean, that's basically how it works. I think that if we have like I said, a running document about what we're looking at for the next year, so like hey, maybe we're gonna implement Mayan culture studies next year, that gets put into this document, that's accessible by board members, it's accessible to the administration. I think that's helpful because I think that provides transparency and it lets people kind of stay on the up and up instead of having something brought in front of them at the last minute, which is always unpleasant regardless of who you are. I think that would be the biggest deal. And I think that that in and of itself would help with new board members who are going to come on anyways, because that's always something that they can request information on if it's something they're passionate about, you know.
I agree. As far as delineating Jason and Jenny between course book and what'd you call it?
Curriculum guide.
Curriculum guide and course book. I can see where the course book doesn't change and the curriculum guide does.
Exactly.
Because the content which feeds into a topic, in English 7 is always gonna be English 7, but the curriculum is gonna change. So just make sure that when Ed Services, we talk about it, or when it's on a resolution, or when we talk about, okay, what are we reviewing? Are we reviewing the course book? Are we reviewing the curriculum guide? Are we reviewing them both jointly? That we recognize that what we are approving when we're approving it, just so that we're on the same page. All right.
Well, I think it came up when one of the things that came up was like the human growth and development. We know we have to teach that. We're gonna approve that in the course book, but I think the question was,
The curriculum.
what is the curriculum?
Right.
So it may not even have anything to do with
To do with the
changing the course
course
book.
book.
We just need a deeper dive
Hence
on
my
what.
point is that,
Yeah.
does this need to be a resolution next week is to approve the course book? Because that this is what the kids see, and I don't have a problem putting it out there, but recognize there's not a lot of meat on the bone
No,
here.
and I still think it should be done.
Yeah.
I agree with Jared that it should be
Okay.
done to be sure that the courses being taught are what align with what's been approved, so.
Right. So the curriculum guide, is there one yet, or is it still in its infancy?
Infancy.
Yeah,
Like just starting.
yeah, exactly, just restarting after a 5-year hiatus. Okay.
I'm
Go ahead, Lori.
I'm assuming that there's like priorities, like certain, like human growth and development, like there are state statutes that require a board. I believe, I haven't dug into it. That's just what I've heard that, so I'm assuming those kind of things are gonna be like your priorities. And you're gonna be able to, obviously, I don't think, some of the classes, maybe like
Basket weaving.
art or basket weaving is necessarily statute related, so.
Yeah,
That's what I would recommend.
That's why I was talking about electives, because it really is gonna come down to an elective situation most of the time.
Right.
And then, if there's a parent or something like that, and they're like, hey, what about this being taught in this class or that class? That's a different situation. That kind of gets brought up on a case by case basis.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay.
So that was the quote unquote procedure, but that was the first 20 minutes of this discussion. And I bring that up only because we're gonna bring it back to ourselves when we take ownership of the policy, which has been deferred until after the Neola book. So we'll have to kind of memorialize that discussion into a policy sometime later this spring. Okay, so the discussion then is on the RMS course book itself. Now that we kind of discuss the rules of the game, it would, I'm not saying my recommendation is very second, but the goal of this is, of course, to have a resolution to move it to full board approval. Would be the outflow of this. Then it's just a matter of, okay, based off of what we just discussed, is there any reason why we wouldn't just make that resolution as is and then start collecting comments from board members over the first quarter to make sure that we log any course that needs to be reviewed?
No, but I have a question on something in here before it gets approved, looking at honors geometry.
Mhm.
Because of the high school accreditation, right now, sometimes there's a copy paste situation. So if you look at honors geometry 2, it's on page 5 at the bottom. It looks like it was a copy paste, so it references algebra. So if we can clean up that language in there. Secondly, in the past, honors geometry received a high school math credit. Algebra was a high school credit, typically an elective credit, still needing to take 3 years. So the verbiage under honors geometry 2 is not reflective of honors geometry 2, in my opinion, based on my experiences with my kids. So I'd just like you to take a look at that, because that should be high school credit, not just, it doesn't say elective credit. It's a little bit confusing in there.
And I think
so-
I dealt with the same thing as a parent. There is confusion there. So we just want to make sure that they realize that it isn't a math credit.
But it specifically says they still need to take 3 more years.
Mhm.
Is it counted as a math credit or is it an elective credit? Does it matter? Like when I worked in Waukesha, it specifically stated this would be an elective credit.
Right.
Very clear that you still need 3 math credits, because then it's not the question of, well, if they already took this high school math class, why do they still need 3 more? So if we simply put the verbiage in there that this is
Agreed.
a high school elective credit for algebra, but then for geometry, this would be a high school math credit. Only 2 years of additional math are required, but 3 or more are recommended, something to that effect.
I agree.
If that's truly the case, if I'm mistaken in that,
Yeah, I'll
misinformed
dig
in that, just
for
kind of
sure.
take a look there.
My understanding, and this is not me with 100% confidence here, but I think back when honors geometry before my time in Watertown was approved and that advanced math track was planted, it was to try to get kids into the deepest of the math classes their junior and senior year. And so giving them still showing that is 3 years expected after they get to high school versus like what they do at Riverside, taking the place of one of the 3 years.
Double check that. I
I
don't know
will.
if you can, because honors geometry at the middle school receives Laude credit.
Okay.
I don't know if you can,
Okay.
because it's considered a high school math credit. So it's encouraged, but I don't know required. So you just might want to check on that,
Sounds good. Will
that
do.
verbiage. The second one in here is kind of nitpicky, but when we use the word students are introduced to something, that implies they don't need to master it. And so these are written by different people, obviously, but if they're introduced to blah, blah, and blah, okay, so to me, I'm like, that's just something great. They might be introduced, yet many of those things that have been referenced, they're actually mastery items at those grade levels, where in other courses, it says students will learn about. So maybe, and that doesn't have to be for this booklet, but as they move forward, having some kind of continuity in what's there would be helpful. That's a minor one. The major one was the math one.
Got it. Thank you.
Mhm. Yeah.
And you will be making those changes? Okay. so-
That's easy enough
Okay.
before noon today to
Okay.
get that taken care of for
Okay,
sure.
good. Thanks. I just want to make sure, yeah, didn't know where the document was or what else needed to be. Okay, any other discussion on that topic?
I don't think so.
Okay. Anybody online?
So move to resolution.
Yep, move to resolution and this is one for those who were at the chairs meeting last night. I'll try to give some flavor to the procedure in a little bit longer explanation, just so people are not just approving it blind, that they understand that they do have a voice. It's just that voice is 15 months from being implemented, if you will. That's just the way that the cadence has to work.
David,
Yeah.
can I just ask a really quick
Yeah.
follow-up? On your proposed timeline, around course, not challenges, but like review, that would end, so Deepwater basket weaving would come to a vote at the board.
It would be for Ed Services to decide if we want to take it up. So if
Okay.
somebody at the full board says, hey, look into basket weaving,
Yeah.
the very next meeting, which in this case would be February, we would discuss it and decide if, okay, let's do that in 2025. Let's get the resources to look at it or provide the resources to that individual who questioned it if the Ed Service wants to bring it up.
You know, if we're looking in our school-based timeline, if we're
Mhm.
looking to have a ready to roll course guide for December. December of 26 for the 27-28 school year.
Yes, yeah,
So December of 26, we're hoping to know what we are able to offer by December of 26 to throw into a course guide that kids can see in January of 27.
mhm,
All of that meshes.
mhm.
Okay,
Yep,
perfect.
that's the goal. And so we're, in the future, this action item, that this discussion, this resolution, ideally then Jason would be on the December docket, not the January.
Perfect.
But we're, and it's like WHS was, but we didn't have the procedure then. We get WHS through, but we didn't have and so WHS, by the way, still has the exact same provision that we just discussed here. Is that I will be, or we should all be accepting input right now for the 26-27 book that we get to review in 25, and that applies both to WHS as well as RMS. And we're just, let's say, a month behind this year, Jason, but hopefully we'll have all that input by the end of 25 for the 20, so that we can, either change 26 or start collecting them on January 2nd for 27.
Perfect.
So what's the process you want to do from here? Like if I wanted, or Sam wanted to
Yeah.
teach in this basket
At-
weaving, what is the process?
At this point, you bring it to an ed service member,
Okay,
but I fully intend to memorialize this in the policy that we're gonna work on between now and May so that we can get it first read, second read after the Neola book is done.
Mhm.
And we actually might, because it doesn't per se affect Lynn and Jared in the same way that all those other policies do,
right.
we could work on it concurrently.
Mhm.
So if Sam and I wanted to do a dive on it, I know that policy deferred it because of, obviously, they got a lot of books to go through. But that doesn't mean they can't kick it to us and we do it parallel path, which means that we could get it ready for, prime time faster,
Mhm.
independent of the policy committee, because the policy the committee only has a certain bandwidth. So I have no problem with Sam and I picking that one up and running with it right now.
And that's kind of what I meant by subcommittee.
Okay, yeah, subcommittee, right. So we could start working on that.
Sponsoring it.
Yeah, we're sponsoring it and we're gonna do it independent per what Diana said. Policy doesn't even have to see it
No,
because it's
they
not
won't
a
if it
policy
comes to-
It would
document.
just come back to that.
They
service.
come back to ed services. So we can begin working on that now, drafting that and maybe even get it out within, a month or two.
Mhm.
So we'll just keep that as a standing action item for this group to evaluate that and see if we can get it to line up with what we just discussed.
Can I make an additional suggestion for process and procedure? As we're looking, we've had this discussion about courses to approve, et cetera. It worked really, really well with what policy has. Here's kind of all the policies that are there and some commentary. If we have a spreadsheet started, a Google Doc, whatever. So these are the courses. If Sam says these 3 courses for the RMS book and Lori says these 5 and I say these 2, we got all these floating around out there. You got elementary, you got middle school, you got high school. How do you keep that organized? And then how do you prioritize it? So.
That's where I was kind of
And
saying,
that
right,
goes,
what's the
that
process?
goes
How's
to
this gonna
us.
work?
That
Right,
goes
that
to us
comes to
and
us.
sometime in January or February,
But-
we'll have to prioritize that list.
Right,
as
but
the
what
Ed
I'm
Service
saying
Committee.
now is, okay, so we're starting this, so we need to
Prime
start
the pump.
having a
Yeah,
document created, so that way it's not just all at once. I want these 10, and then you're feeling overwhelmed.
Right.
Because then you can knock off a couple each, hey, this is a shorter meeting, we're gonna talk about these 3 areas,
Well,
something,
prioritize.
let's
whatever.
assume that February, we're gonna go through a list of 6 to 12 courses. I don't know what it's gonna be, so that's gonna be at the February meeting. That's what we're gonna have to do to kick off the process.
But this will be an ongoing kind of thing, I'm
Yeah.
assuming, it's not just gonna be a one and done, so my only comment is some sort of spreadsheet, something to help us organize and prioritize.
Yeah, I was gonna suggest that as an action item at the end of.
I feel like what we need our next step would be is to sit down and sort of understand where we're at and what our next steps need to be with it. I completely understand that right now. Sending any concerns to you so that we can start prioritizing that, creating a list. If we want to take a look at where the Neola policy is compared to the WSD current policy is, our current policy is pretty silent on what happens with the course book. The Neola policy, like I said, it says that the board is given a list of the courses that are taught each year. It's not given the course book, it's not given the curriculum guide, it's given a list. And so I think starting there, I think the idea that in February, like in 4 weeks that we would already be reviewing courses is like, Would be
It's
really
it's
aggressive.
prioritizing courses.
okay,
It's prioritizing the courses. So if there are 15 courses or 20 courses that get brought up and Ed Services looks at it and say, there's no way we're gonna do 20 courses in 2025. Then we gotta prioritize them and knock them down to 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever we think the bandwidth is.
okay.
I do think that the best way to start would be to take the course books and the ones that we have now, where we know this is gonna be taught over the next year at least, put those into a Google Docs document. You can share that with board members, make it comment only, and board members can comment and say, hey, this is one, and it'll leave a little like sticky note on the side of the. on the side of
I
the
don't think you can do it with a Google Doc because then it's a walking board meeting, because the just comments are going from different members. So
Yeah, we'll have to, yeah.
I tried that with something else and I was told that specifically, so a good
Maybe
idea,
start with the
suggestion,
policy.
but we have to think of a system, doesn't need to be decided right now.
Yeah, at some point, in action items, we talked about it last night from the chairs meeting, a repository for action items. This would be a very, very specific type of action item, related to a very narrow topic. But one that could capture, it's just still a matter, we'd have to have a running list to capture. And then a running list that we've prioritized. I don't know. And I'm not gonna try to figure it out now.
Send you an email, yeah.
We'll figure it out. Okay. Move on.
All right, next one, open enrollment seat determination. This is something that we do annually. And there are, as I can tell, no changes. Regular education seats, I will speak to briefly. We have left those open enrollment seats, unlimited. As far as I know, as long as we've been here, which just means that any student who would want to open enroll into our school district, we would have seats available for that student. There are certain, parameters around that as far as like expulsions from other schools, et cetera. And then Sarah, I'll turn it over to you can speak to the special education seats.
Yeah, and nothing has changed from last year. So we are not accepting students that are not residents into our district, with active and current IEPs. As we do not have the services and supports, to expend to students that are not our residents. We do have a waiting list though. If we were to ever have,
For
The
special
funding-
education seats,
yes, so we do keep a waiting list. Students don't come off the waiting list at this time because we don't have the services and supports.
right?
We do have to have a resolution according to state law by the end of January.
Yep.
So this
So
one
we'll
will
do
be
that at the full
to
board.
resolution.
Any questions on that? Same as last year.
Mhm.
Well, I understand the special ed. Is there ever an exception to the rule? If we have 0, that means 0.
That is correct.
Okay, I was just,
There
Curious.
cannot be any exceptions made in any sort of cases.
gotcha. No, I don't.
And how long has it been 0 to anybody's knowledge? As far as.
Last
open
year was
enrollment?
0.
Yep, I know last year was.
It was,
We had
I
some
wanna say it's been
limited-
limited in like 18 to 21-year-old programming at one point. Which we are not gonna have any openings next year either. But we do all the calculations as we have to every single year and has remained
So this
steadfast.
is by no means arbitrary. This is,
Nope.
or a business decision. This is, that we've done the math and the math supports these numbers and
Correct.
it is what it is.
It is what it is.
Got it.
And this follows suit with school districts across the state as
Because I
well.
believe it was probably my first year. I know we had a pretty big open seat
Could be.
allowment, and I was a little shocked by that. And now I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So good.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, so for resolution,
All right,
what do we come up with action items from today?
so the resolution for open enrollment seats, the resolution on the RMS course book. We are going to work through the curriculum policy later this spring. We can talk through what those pieces look like. We're gonna check on the RMS math credit verbiage. I do believe there's specific board policy that relates to that, so I'll bring that back as well. I am going to determine how we're going to keep a running list of courses to be reviewed and what that might look like. And then I feel like those are the pieces that I came across.
Anybody else? Lori, Sam, Craig? Lori, Sam, Diana, sorry, waiting for Craig to chime in. Diana,
I do have one.
yeah,
I know in the last, probably a couple of years, but like specifically in the last couple of months, we have gone back and forth to behaviorals. And I just didn't know, it's never come here. We've never taken it. We've talked about restorative practices. We've talked about what that looks like. And I don't know if that's just on the back wagon or if we need another update. You know what I'm talking, you know what I'm saying?
Well,
Like,
yeah, I'm not,
and I don't know.
yeah, I'm
what
not
that looks
disagreeing
like.
with you. I think we did have restorative practices sometime in the past fall. The question is when is it done, or when is it presented to the satisfaction? If it's always a work in progress, then I guess I'm not saying that I'm not always interested in an update. The question is there ever not a time where we wouldn't want an update? I don't know if that's the nature of your question, or are you looking for a definitive answer on where we are? Or what's changed or how it's going?
Well, I think we just, and I don't know if that's part of I know it's been kind of confusing because we've changed some of our data, and I know we've had it at data meetings. We're not doing data meetings. If that's something that's gonna go once we start digging into the strategic plan. I'm just trying to get a basis, like, I just don't, we hear behaviors, but we never do anything about here.
At least not
Just
that.
Not that we're not doing it. You guys are doing it.
At least not
But is
ed
there anything,
services.
is there more supports? Is there something new? Is there anything, or do we just sit and they'll bring it to us if needed? Does that,
Good,
that's, I guess, what I'm asking, like, do we need, or are we just gonna,
I don't have an answer. I guess I don't know what question to ask them to present to me on, so
I know.
I'm leery to ask for an action item or an agenda item if I'm not even sure what I'm interested in.
So I guess, can I jump in?
yeah, please do.
Conversations with Lori and Tina. Tina was very big on the behavior thing her entire time on the board. And I know that since my time started on the board, restorative practices has been kind of the answer that has been given for behavior issues. Yet we know that the restorative practices aren't the be all end all to everything. But this group has not received anything other than that.
Right.
Yet we also have seen data coming forward now because we're more data driven, talking about expulsions up or down, suspensions up or down, blah, 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 up or down, problems in, HR talks about problems in sub-retention due to behaviors. All of these things come back to this and this is kind of what you're getting at, I know, this underlying piece about behavior, but the only thing this group has heard has been regarding like the restorative practice type things, which talks about this piece of it. There's some other stuff there. So I think your question, correct me if I'm wrong, is does this group have an appetite or need to talk about some of the other stuff different than this piece?
Right.
I would like, if we're going to do that, I want it data driven. I don't want it out there. And I don't know if we have that yet. But I do know that Sarah's been working a lot with behavioral things. You did present something to us about the
Human
behavior
resources meeting
plans,
every year.
things going through that regarding some of the work that's been done. I know that's at the beginning stages this year. And I think it might have an appetite for this group, whether it be at the beginning of the school year, next year, at the end of it, something, an update. How has that plan that you've implemented, how is that going? What have we seen in terms of suspensions, retentions, was it a policy I just read that states that, I don't know, I'm so knee deep in policy, that, we shouldn't be suspending out of school. So then, okay, we have all been accustomed to this happens, it's an out of school suspension. This happens, it's an in-school suspension. But if that has changed, then I think this group would have an appetite to hear what's different. What does that look like? Did I kind of hit your nail?
You did, and I know that there are pieces that are happening. I just, you don't want to just ignore it either, you know what I mean? Like, I want to make sure that there isn't anything we should be discussing or an update, or at least get it on a future calendar or cycle or whatever that looks like, and just bringing it forth. You know, like Jenny and Chris and I sat down and went through, you know, data, and I know that there's a lot of work being done because things aren't being reported correctly, or, you know, in Skyward, and it can make things look really mucky. So we want to make sure that we are not getting lost in the muck.
So what?
Well, and.
I don't know what I'm asking. I'm asking for discussion.
And I'm appreciative of that. And
Yeah.
I'm trying to keep us at the right level.
I-
And
I
that right
get
level
it.
is governance, not management. And if they choose to change a system by which they want to code an incident, that's a discretion of the administration. It's not a discretion for the board. I'm not suggesting you go down that rabbit hole. I'm saying is that if they are continually improving and reviewing and improving their processes.
Let it
And-
sit for now.
And I say, are you? And they say, we are. And I'm like, okay, I'm happy.
Mhm.
Now, when we get cornered on the street, or I bumped into a substitute teacher at
Right.
Literatus last week, and I got an earful about a kid that he had to teach at Lincoln that was unruly and prevented him from doing his job, and he couldn't get a kid out of the classroom and had no, what are you doing about it? I'm like, I'm not doing anything. I'm a board member. But I don't know what you guys are doing about it. I know I'm not doing anything
No,
about it.
and I get that, but you know, even like the vaping, the drugs, these things, like, is there something that we need to be doing different? Do we need to get, you know, I'm not.
No, I
saying we're supposed to be
understand.
resource-
But this goes back
But
to
there
my
are some
question.
stuff that we have
This is my
to,
earlier comment. It's ongoing, in which
Mhm.
case, how often do we need an update on it? Or only?
I just, it's
that's-
not even necessarily an update, is there something we need
To-
to do? Like,
Yeah.
not necessarily us, but that we would have to approve. So I just didn't know.
Okay.
Maybe it's just
I
something for
know,
you
and
guys to talk about.
by no means am I
and
disagreeing with
bring an
the
update.
sentiment. I'm
Mhm.
just trying to understand the mechanism by which we
Yeah, I don't,
we do review it occasionally. And I'll say on an as-needed basis when there's a new topic or a very specific question.
mhm.
But that doesn't mean that we're always kept abreast of every new development. Because it's more of
Right.
it's a pull strategy, not a push. They don't, we ask them for information, they bring it to us. It's not, hey, we're gonna bring you an update every single quarter.
No, I know.
But is it possible to get an update, whether it be once a year on a somewhat regular basis from Sarah, for example, about how that process is going, at least for the first 3 years? Because what you do year 1 versus year 2 versus year 3, is that an unreasonable ask? Or is there something different? I don't need an answer. I'm wondering.
I don't know that that's an unreasonable ask. I don't think so. When I was a building level manager, I used to, report on different data, but you would be able to see where things were because, you would receive PBIS medals, right? You'd be notarized as this wonderful, wonderful building. What I will say is, right now, we are calibrating how we're reporting certain things. We did a lovely exercise at the last time that the entire cabinet team was together. And it was so interesting on how people would report something in Skyward versus what somebody else would. And we had some really fun but in-depth discussions on what would we categorize this behavior? What would we then do with this? So we are still working through some of those calibration pieces because it looks different. The data does. By building because of how it's being reported. And then in the Skyward system, which is not perfect by any means, we can add things or we can take them away. And so we are still in that process. I will tell you that without getting further down the rabbit hole, but the buildings have been doing a really, really great job in creating those systems. That's not true. They've had systems, enhancing the systems so that students are having more time learning and less time, dealing with other things, which is our goal, right? Our goal is to educate, but our goal is to also educate on soft skills. And when one of our little friends is having a really, really tough time, we have to teach them, just like when we have to teach them how to read. And so those are all those multifaceted pieces. And just a reminder that, you're talking about vapes and stuff, very, very interestingly, most of those vapes are coming from parents. So when we talk about what do, it is a systemic issue of, our kids are getting them at home. and they're bringing them on in. And so, not all of them, but I would say a huge portion. And we need to do something systemically, to educate.
That was a great update.
Yeah, I think that, the thing is we were given the access to, the wise dash, which is amazing, and I love the transparency, but that can, and without sitting down with Jenny and Chris, like, I was losing my mind looking at it. I was like, what? Are you kidding me? So information is only so good unless we have some discussions on what that looks like and what we're doing with it, right? So that I guess is where I was kind of like doing the check-in on that, like.
Okay, Craig and, Sam first and then Craig, question or comment?
No, I was gonna agree with what both of you said. A yearly update is not unreasonable at all. I think it's only been about 5 or 6 months since we had our last update. However, I think that a periodic discussion by the board about those things, more frequently than yearly is not a bad idea. I would say, not the board, the committee, I'm sorry. I think that maybe even a quarterly discussion, like, hey, what are you guys hearing? What are you guys thinking? Having that discussion on ed services would be worthwhile, because I think it's something that deserves a little bit more attention from us than just us talking about it once a year and like being like, oh, well, that's how it is.
Okay.
Because you guys are doing a lot of work, but I think that we need to be
And
keeping that at the top of
Okay,
our mind.
and that's great. Craig, comment? I'll circle back to your Sam.
Yeah, I can understand the sentiment about governance versus management to an extent, except for that when that extent reaches to the point where, hey, listen, we put in certain things for governance and that is not exactly meeting its expected intention. So for instance, if the behaviors are out of control, at some point the board has to step in and say that this system is broken, and that if we're not willing to have a discussion about looking at those things and seeing what we can fix as a board, what needs to change in order for that, then we're not doing either of those jobs well. So I really think that we do need to look at those numbers. And if a particular administrator, for instance, if they're not even entering the information properly into Skyward, or is even just trying to dodge that information, that can be a problem also. So there's more to it than just governance versus management. So some of those things I'm concerned about as well.
To be clear, we do not have any administrators that are not entering information to Skyward. No one is dodging, putting in any sort of information. We do not have unruly behavior that is overtaking any of our schools. Our students are genuinely appropriate for their developmental age and capacity. We do have students that bring in extra. They bring in things that do impede their learning from time to time. And so we work with our students through those extra pieces that they have to deal with as young people.
Another comment was made about getting students as much learning time as possible. And here's the thing. I'm not sure what that means really as a board member, because does that mean that when a child goes to the particular office, they're buddy with the administrator and then gets sent back with a bag of chips to the classroom to immediately when they should be dismissed from that classroom because of the disruption behavior? I don't know what that means. So I would really appreciate a little bit more specifics behind some of that. And again, this is where I take issue with some of these comments.
Can I make a suggestion? This is not an agenda item, and so we have gotten beyond an update, and I apologize for contributing what I did to open whatever I might have opened. But if this is something that we could put as a future agenda item at some point, so we can take a deep, because a lot of great comments. It's just
And
this is
and
not.
I'm gonna,
That's kind of what I was.
and my answer is that, first, Craig, I'll agree with your first comment I won't agree with your second. As far as, when it gets into how a principal or a building gets a child back into a classroom or back out, that is definitively not the board's, purview. The success of that strategy is. the board's
Disagree.
purview. That is the success of that strategy is the board's purview. So, that's where I agree with your first comment, not your second. That being this stated, Jenny, on a regular basis, you're putting Act 20 on your director's report. You're putting other miscellaneous efforts on your director's report. Can behaviors and or whatever you want to call it be a standing item on your director's report? That way, it's a director's report. This is what we've done lately. This is what we're changing. This is how the implementation of Skyward is, or changes to Skyward. This is when we might have another Wise Dash local deep dive, et cetera, et cetera. But that way, we're revisiting it as necessary as part of a director's report, not not as a full-blown discussion item, but we can certainly kick it to a full-blown discussion item if we have questions about Jenny and or what she's brought up at a director's report on a regular basis. And if there's no new current events, then there's no new current events and it doesn't end up on there, just like Act 20 wouldn't end up on there.
And it can look very different, K-5,
Well, yeah.
RMS, high school, you may just need to be like, hey, at the high school, this is what we're seeing, or hey, at elementary, this, because I don't think they all go into the same bowl. I think there can be very different,
Right, but that'll be at
Issues,
Jenny's
but-
discretion and we can
Yep.
ask her questions
Perfect.
and we'll just put it in as a director's report.
Thank you. I didn't mean to derail.
You did, but I let you.
I was basically saying, should it come maybe?
It came under future agenda planning.
Yes, thank you.
Hijacking, yeah, I think,
Sorry.
that's what I called that last night. didn't I? Okay, the other item I just wanted to follow up on from a past action item was, summer school in
Oh, yeah.
Whitaker and a team, both Diana and Fred had volunteered to do that. We gave Jason really until roughly March 1st. It's January 13th.
There's an email out about setting up 2 days.
Yes, and so I had talked to Lynn briefly last night. I had said I would volunteer if there was I don't have a problem being there. Do we need 2 board members? Do you want 2 board members there?
I was just a suggestion
Yeah,
from last month.
I have no problem being there. I don't need to be there. I just wanted to make sure there was a board member present. So we can talk about that outside of,
Yeah.
right after this.
We're
and-
working on scheduling those with an update.
Yeah,
potentially in
it's just that
February.
we're down to 6-7 weeks to get it done
Yeah.
by March 1st, if that's what Jason felt he needed to do to be ready for summer school and then report back to Ed Services in the
Yep.
month of March.
But I purposefully checked out all of last week, took my and
We
so-
wondered if we'd hear from you right now. So I'll follow up with you and Jason. He texted me if he could leave after his course book and I said
Yeah.
yes, so that's why he left. So,
Okay, any additional future action items? Yep. I think we captured most of that.
all right.
Okay,
Am I calling it 9:07?
yep, class dismissed.
9:07.